Germany, 1933. A nation humiliated, broken, and restless. From the ashes of the Great War, a new power was rising, one that promised strength, precision, and order through steel. Factories roared to life again. Engines rumbled, furnaces blazed, and designers turned sketches into weapons. Every bolt, every barrel, every piece of iron was shaped with a single purpose: to make sure Germany would never kneel again. In this new Reich, engineering wasn't just science. It was faith. And inside the walls of Mauser and Rheinmetall, a group of men dreamed of building the most efficient killing machine the world had ever seen. The Great War had taught the Germans a brutal lesson. Victory didn't belong to the biggest army, but to the one that could fire longest, move fastest, and waste nothing. The machine gun had changed everything, and the future of war would be written by those who mastered it. Their first creation was the MG-42, elegant, complex, and deadly, a precision weapon built like a Swiss watch. It could spit out 800 rounds per minute, its barrel gleaming like polished glass, its mechanism smooth and mechanical. But there was a problem. The MG-42 was too perfect, too delicate. It demanded care, precision, and time. Three things the chaos of war could not give. Dust jammed it, mud killed it. Every tiny piece had to fit together flawlessly, or the whole machine would fall silent. As war loomed closer, Germany needed something else, something simpler, something unstoppable. By 1939, the design orders came down from the top. Build a weapon that can be made faster, cheaper, and still fire with the fury of a storm. It must be light enough for one man to carry, strong enough to survive sand, snow, and blood alike, and fast enough to drown the enemy in bullets. The engineers listened, and they began to design a monster. They replaced milled steel with stamped parts, cheap, efficient, and fast to produce. They stripped away polish and luxury and replaced it with raw industrial brutality. The weapon had to be forged for war, not for pride. When the first prototypes fired, the air itself seemed to shatter. The guns screamed instead of roaring, a sound so fast, so violent, that individual shots blurred into one endless metallic scream. 1,200 rounds per minute, 20 bullets every second, an orchestra of thunder and steel. The men testing it were stunned. The gun kicked, hissed, and smoked like a living creature. The barrel glowed red after seconds of fire. But it didn't stop. It never stopped. They called it the Maschinengewehr 42, the MG-42. The world would soon give it another name: Hitler's Buzzsaw. Because when it sang, men ran. When it screamed, men hid. The Wehrmacht had just been given a weapon unlike any the world had ever seen. One that could tear through a platoon in seconds, cut down trees, walls, and courage alike. It was more than just a gun. It was the embodiment of Germany's new war machine: cold, efficient, and terrifyingly precise. By the summer of 1942, the MG-42 was rolling off assembly lines by the thousands. Each one stamped from metal sheets, riveted, welded, and sent to the front. It took 1/10 the time to build compared to the MG-34, and half the cost. It was a perfect creation, not because it was beautiful, but because it didn't need to be. On paper, it was the most efficient machine gun ever made. In the hands of a German infantryman, it became something else entirely: a symphony of destruction, an echo of a nation's industrial power unleashed upon the world. And soon that echo would roll across Europe, from the deserts of North Africa to the beaches of Normandy. Allied soldiers would hear that scream for the first time and understand what it meant to face the future of war.
Act 2. The Roar of Mechanized War. 1942. Europe burns with an industrial fire. Empires crumble, cities vanish, and armies clash in the ruins of a dying continent. But amidst all this chaos, a new sound emerges. A sound that no soldier had ever heard before. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't artillery. It was faster, sharper, and somehow more alive. A metallic snarl that sliced through wind and distance, a sound that would haunt the dreams of every man who faced it. It was the MG-42, and it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Germans called it Maschinengewehr Zweiunddreißig. The Allies gave it a simpler name, Hitler's Buzzsaw, a fitting title for a weapon that could turn flesh and steel into dust in seconds. To understand the MG-42, you have to understand the German mind of that era, a mind obsessed with precision, rhythm, and domination through design. The MG-42 was not simply built. It was engineered, crafted like a symphony of metal and motion. Every part stamped, pressed, and balanced for perfection. It could be assembled faster, repaired easier, and produced cheaper than its predecessor, the MG-34. Yet it was deadlier in every conceivable way. By the summer of 1942, the German infantry was evolving. The old doctrine of slow, coordinated movement gave way to speed, firepower, and fluid tactics. And at the center of every unit was not the rifle, but the machine gun. 10 men in a squad, 9 supporting one gun. That was the philosophy. The MG was the heart. The riflemen were its blood. When the MG-42 spoke, everyone listened. It fired at a rate of over 1,200 rounds per minute, nearly twice as fast as most Allied weapons. The sound didn't come in bursts or single shots. It came as one unbroken roar, a rippling growl that made the earth tremble. It didn't sound human. It sounded mechanical, unfeeling, inevitable. In the ruins of Stalingrad, its echo rolled between shattered walls. German gunners perched in upper floors or broken factories, their barrels glowing red in the night. They would fire until the metal warped, then swap barrels with practiced precision. A motion so...
Act 2. The Roar of Mechanized War. 1942. Europe burns with an industrial fire. Empires crumble, cities vanish, and armies clash in the ruins of a dying continent. But amidst all this chaos, a new sound emerges. A sound that no soldier had ever heard before. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't artillery. It was faster, sharper, and somehow more alive. A metallic snarl that sliced through wind and distance. A sound that would haunt the dreams of every man who faced it. It was the MG-42, and it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Germans called it Maschinengewehr 42. The Allies gave it a simpler name, Hitler's Buzzsaw, a fitting title for a weapon that could turn flesh and steel into dust in seconds. To understand the MG-42, you have to understand the German mind of that era. A mind obsessed with precision, rhythm, and domination through design. The MG-42 was not simply built, it was engineered, crafted like a symphony of metal and motion. Every part stamped, pressed, and balanced for perfection. It could be assembled faster, repaired easier, and produced cheaper than its predecessor, the MG-34. Yet, it was deadlier in every conceivable way. By the summer of 1942, the German infantry was evolving. The old doctrine of slow, coordinated movement gave way to speed, firepower, and fluid tactics. And at the center of every unit was not the rifle, but the machine gun. 10 men in a squad, 9 supporting one gun. That was the philosophy. The MG was the heart, the riflemen were its blood. When the MG-42 spoke, everyone listened. It fired at a rate of over 1,200 rounds per minute, nearly twice as fast as most Allied weapons. The sound didn't come in bursts or single shots. It came as one unbroken roar, a rippling growl that made the earth tremble. It didn't sound human. It sounded mechanical, unfeeling, inevitable. In the ruins of Stalingrad, its echo rolled between shattered walls. German gunners perched in upper floors of broken factories, their barrels glowing red in the night. They would fire until the metal warped, then swap barrels with practiced precision, a motion so fast it became choreography. Even in the frozen dark, even with frostbite gnawing at the fingers, the MG-42 kept singing its terrible song. Soviet soldiers called it the Devil's Loom. To them, it sounded as if the sky itself had been torn apart. Advancing towards it was suicide. Its fire would cut through the snow, the air, even through courage itself. In North Africa, the same scream echoed across endless dunes. Rommel's Afrika Korps brought the MG-42 into a world of heat and dust. It sat on tripods atop half-tracks, tanks, and sandbagged nests. The desert wind filled its mechanisms with grit, but the gun didn't care. It kept firing, cutting through mirages and smoke. The weapon seemed unstoppable, an extension of the German will. British infantry learned to fear it deeply. Reports from El Alamein spoke of patrols vanishing under invisible bursts. A single MG-42 could pin down an entire company. Men described it as fighting against lightning. There was no time to react, no moment to breathe. You simply dropped to the sand and prayed the next burst missed you. When the Americans landed in Sicily, they met it for the first time. The sound shattered their nerves. It didn't sound like any weapon they knew. Not the thumping BAR, not the rattling Thompson, not even the mighty Browning .5 cal. The MG-42 was something alien, and worse, it was everywhere. On the Western Front, it became the soul of the German defense. By 1944, every hedgerow, every farmhouse, every bunker hid an MG-42. When D-Day came, the beaches of Normandy became its stage. The roar began at dawn. Allied soldiers described the sound as the sky tearing apart. The gun chewed through sandbags, steel and bone alike. Those who survived said it felt less like fighting men and more like running from a machine that could not die. But the MG-42 was not invincible. Its power came at a cost. It devoured ammunition at an impossible rate. A single minute of continuous fire could burn through an entire belt. German squads carried thousands of rounds, yet it was never enough. The gun's hunger was endless. It demanded constant feeding, constant care. Every 700 rounds, a barrel had to be changed before it melted. Even with German efficiency, keeping it alive was exhausting. Still, no one could deny its effectiveness. Everywhere the MG-42 went, it changed the rhythm of war. Commanders built tactics around it. Officers shaped defenses with its range in mind. And soldiers, on both sides, measured their courage against its roar. There was a grim admiration even among its enemies. Captured MG-42s were studied, used, and copied. American engineers, astounded by its design, would later use its principles in weapons like the M60. The British examined it, the Soviets imitated it, and decades later, its descendant, the MG-3, would serve in NATO armies. But in 1942, none of that mattered. In that moment, on the front lines of Europe and Africa, the MG-42 was simply death given form. It was the voice of the Reich's ambition, cold, mechanical, unstoppable. Each trigger pull was a statement that Germany was not done.
The Allies feared its sound before they saw its fire. A single burst could turn courage into panic, discipline into chaos. It ruled the battlefield not just with bullets, but with fear. And that fear became its most powerful weapon. Because the MG-42 was not just a gun, it was a presence. A whisper carried by the wind before every ambush. A vibration through the earth before every battle. A scream that defined an entire generation of war. And as the Reich pushed deeper into a burning continent, the roar of mechanized war grew louder. It was the anthem of conquest, the rhythm of destruction, the terrifying heartbeat of a machine-driven empire. But no roar lasts forever, and soon the very weapon that symbolized German power would become the echo of its downfall.
Act 3. The Sound of Fear. They said you could hear it before you saw it. A low hum at first, like bees swarming behind clouds. Then a tearing, howling scream that ripped through the air and through your soul. It was not a sound made by men. It was mechanical, relentless, merciless. A sound that belonged to something unfeeling. A thing that existed only to kill. The MG-42 was not merely a machine gun. It was psychological warfare incarnate. Its bullets didn't just kill bodies, they murdered courage. They shattered the very idea of bravery before it could form. To the Allied soldier, the MG-42 was an invisible predator. You never saw it until it spoke. You would hear its shriek, and the world would explode around you. Branches, bricks, helmets, all shredded in a fraction of a second. Then silence. The silence was worse. Because silence meant it was waiting, watching, reloading. The soldiers on every front told the same story. In Italy, American GIs advancing up the mountains heard its cry echo off the stone walls. They froze where they stood. One burst, and the front of the column would disappear in red mist. In Normandy, paratroopers crawling through the hedgerows whispered to each other in trembling voices, "If you hear the buzzsaw, keep your head down and pray." In the frozen woods of the Ardennes, British soldiers described the same sound as the laughter of the devil himself. Veterans decades later still flinched when they heard the sound of ripping canvas or a jackhammer in the street, because to them it wasn't a noise, it was a memory of terror, smoke, and brothers dying faster than you could call their names.
Psychologists who studied survivors after the war noted something unusual. Soldiers who faced the MG-42 often developed a unique kind of trauma, not from being wounded, but from the anticipation of death. The weapon's speed created a new dimension of fear. The human brain couldn't process it. It couldn't count the bullets, couldn't locate the shooter, couldn't even comprehend the rhythm. It was too fast, too continuous, too overwhelming. For the first time, men realized they weren't fighting other men. They were fighting an idea. The idea of unstoppable destruction. They called it mechanical fear. The German army knew this. They built entire tactics around it. An MG-42 crew could hold off dozens, even hundreds of enemies because most would never dare to advance once the gun opened fire. Every scream of its barrel rewired the battlefield, turning open ground into a death zone. A single gun team could stop a platoon, pin them down, force them to hide, make them lose time and morale. In this sense, the MG-42 was not just a weapon of war. It was a weapon of time. Every burst stole minutes, hours, lives. It delayed invasions, ruined plans, and broke formations. Every second under its fire felt like eternity. German propaganda capitalized on this. Newsreels celebrated the singing death of the Wehrmacht. They claimed it was the sound of superiority, the anthem of German engineering. But to the soldiers on the front, the gun was not glorious. It was monstrous. Even German gunners feared it. They spoke of the MG-42 as if it were alive, as if it demanded blood to function. Its high rate of fire meant endless ammunition belts, endless barrel changes, endless attention. If you failed to feed it, it punished you. It could overheat, seize up, or cook off rounds in the chamber. To control it was to dance with a machine that could turn on you in a heartbeat. Veterans described it like taming a dragon. Every time they pulled the trigger, the weapon roared back, shaking in their hands, vibrating through their bones. They respected it. They feared it. And some admitted, quietly, that they loved it. Because when it worked, it gave them a feeling no other weapon could, the illusion of invincibility, a sense of power that made the chaos of war seem controllable. Behind its iron sights, a man could feel like a god. But the moment he stopped firing, the illusion shattered. For the Allies, the MG-42 became more than an obstacle. It became myth. Rumors spread through the ranks. Some claimed it fired so fast the bullets were touching each other mid-air. Others swore it could cut a man in half with a single burst. In the trenches, soldiers passed around exaggerated tales because it was easier to believe in a monster than to face reality, that a simple German machine gun was just that efficient at killing. In every theater, it left its mark. In the East, Soviet soldiers nicknamed it the bone saw. In the West, Americans called it the Buzzsaw. In the South, Italians who fought alongside the Germans called it the devil's breath. Every language found its own word for the same feeling: fear. War photographers and correspondents wrote of seeing men break down before even reaching the front lines. A burst of MG-42 fire over the horizon could drain the color from a soldier's face. It had become the universal sound of death, a noise that needed no translation. On D-Day, that sound ruled the beach. The first waves of Allied troops hit the sand, and from the cliffs came the scream. They had trained for months, rehearsed every step, but no training could prepare them for that sound. Machine gun nests cut through ranks before the men could even raise their rifles. The bullets tore through surf, through helmets, through the very idea of safety. The ocean turned red. One American survivor later said, "When you hear that sound, you don't think. You just pray it's not aimed at you." That was the power of the MG-42. To kill not only bodies, but the human instinct to fight back. In modern warfare studies, historians call it the psychological tipping point. A weapon so effective that it redefined how soldiers perceived battle. It forced the Allies to adapt, to change tactics, to bring in armor, smoke, and overwhelming artillery just to silence a single gun. Yet even when silenced, its echo remained. It echoed in reports, in letters, in nightmares. The MG-42 became a symbol of industrial terror, proof that humanity could create something so perfect at killing that it transcended the line between tool and monster. For the rest of the war, the sound of the MG-42 haunted every battlefield it touched. And even decades after, in quiet living rooms and hospital wards, old men would wake in the night to that same tearing sound, the metallic scream that once ruled the earth. Because some sounds never die. They stay with you, buried deep in memory, waiting for the silence between breaths to come alive again. And that silence, that eternal echo, is the true legacy of the MG-42's fear.
Act 4. Perfection of Destruction. By 1943, the Third Reich was running out of time. Factories were burning, convoys were sinking, and the war machine that had once seemed unstoppable was beginning to choke on its own ambition. But even as the walls of Germany closed in, its engineers refused to surrender their obsession with perfection. They turned to what they did best, building machines that could outfight, outlast, and outgun the world. And at the heart of that obsession stood a weapon that embodied everything the Reich believed in: the MG-42. Unlike the grand tanks of the Eastern Front or the V-2 rockets that promised distant revenge, the MG-42 was simple in its purpose: to dominate the ground, to control the rhythm of battle, to turn men into machines. It was not elegant. It was not beautiful. It was efficient. A tool born from steel, sweat, and mathematics. The German engineers who refined it were not dreamers, they were pragmatists. They saw the chaos of war and sought to impose order through design. Every line, every curve, every spring had a reason to exist. Where other nations sought innovation through complexity, Germany sought mastery through simplification. Stamped steel replaced machined parts. The receiver could be built faster, with fewer materials, and still withstand the brutal punishment of frontline combat. A gun that once took a week to craft could now be assembled in hours. It was industrial evolution under fire. The MG-42's genius lay not just in its fire rate, but in its sustainability. A quick-change barrel system allowed crews to keep firing while other machine guns melted down. A clever recoil system absorbed the gun's own fury, keeping it stable even at its blistering speed. Its feed mechanism, simple yet brilliant,
handled belts of ammunition with clockwork precision. This was not just German engineering. It was German philosophy. Order through function, power through precision. And behind every design choice, the echo of a nation's ideology, a belief that perfection could win the war. The MG-42 became the centerpiece of the Wehrmacht's firepower. It didn't just serve the army, it defined it. Infantry squads became extensions of the gun. Every movement, every advance, every defensive hold revolved around the machine gun's position. The riflemen protected it, the officers coordinated it, the logistics fed it. The MG-42 was not just part of the system, it was the system. Even its sound became a strategic weapon. Psychologists in the Wehrmacht recognized its effect on enemy morale. Reports noted that Allied soldiers were more likely to retreat under sustained MG-42 fire than under equivalent artillery bombardment. It wasn't just the bullets that broke them. It was the perception of endlessness, the sense that death had no reload time. The German command used that to their advantage. They built their defenses around overlapping fields of MG-42 fire. Bunkers, ridges, ruins, all arranged so that no inch of ground went unclaimed by its roar. A single defensive line could appear unbreakable, not because of manpower, but because of the weapon's relentless efficiency. But behind the triumph of design, a darker truth grew. Perfection demanded a price. Each MG-42 required trained men, barrels, belts, oil, and endless ammunition. As the war dragged on, Germany could no longer keep up. Steel was rationed, fuel dwindled, and the men who once mastered these weapons were being lost faster than they could be replaced. Factories turned to forced labor. Women and prisoners built the same weapons that would guard their oppressors. The perfection of destruction came to rely on the imperfection of desperation. Yet even in the final months of the war, the MG-42 refused to fade. It remained a symbol of precision amid chaos, the last breath of an empire obsessed with efficiency even as it burned. When the Allies pushed into Germany, they captured hundreds of MG-42s. American and British engineers examined them with disbelief. Here was a weapon that could be produced cheaply, fired endlessly, and maintained easily. They copied it, studied it, and learned from it. The Americans borrowed its recoil and feed systems to develop the M60. The Soviets integrated elements of its design into their own general-purpose machine guns. And post-war Germany, when reborn into NATO, resurrected it almost unchanged as the MG3. Proof that the design outlived the ideology that created it. Even today, in conflicts far from the ruins of Berlin, its descendants still roar. Modernized, refined, renamed, but unmistakable in spirit. The same rhythm, the same precision, the same terrifying efficiency. The MG-42 was not merely a weapon of the Second World War. It was the blueprint for all modern machine guns. It taught the world how to mass-produce lethality without sacrificing performance. It redefined how soldiers fought, how armies were structured, how fear itself could be engineered. But that same perfection also revealed a truth about humanity, that when we chase efficiency without conscience, we build things that outlive us, not in glory, but in echoes of destruction. The MG-42 was a mirror of its makers. Brilliant, ruthless, cold. It represented everything that made the Third Reich formidable and everything that doomed it. Because perfection without morality is just another path to extinction. And so, even as the Reich collapsed into ruins, the MG-42 remained flawless, still firing, still singing, still reminding the world that machines can be perfect, but men never will be.
Act 5. Legacy of Steel and Echoes. The war ended. The Reich collapsed into ashes. But the MG-42 did not die. It transcended flags, languages, and borders, becoming the template for every machine gun that came after it. In the aftermath of 1945, Allied engineers gathered up the weapons of their fallen enemy, not to destroy them, but to understand them. When they opened the MG-42, they found not just steel, but brilliance. Its roller-locked mechanism, its stamped construction, its terrifying reliability. These were not just features of a weapon, but lessons in efficiency. The Americans took notes. The Soviets experimented. And in the workshops of West Germany, engineers who had once built for the Reich began designing for NATO. Out of the ashes came the MG-3, nearly identical in design, chambered for NATO's 7.62 by 51 millimeters. It was the same song, played in a new key. Decades passed. The MG-3 served in the Cold War, in the Balkans, in Afghanistan. It became the voice of German firepower once again, not as a symbol of conquest, but as a guardian of Europe's borders. Even today, it roars from the mountains of Norway, the deserts of Egypt, the forests of Finland. It's the same gun that once echoed over the beaches of Normandy, proof that design can outlive ideology. But perhaps its greatest legacy is invisible, hidden in the DNA of almost every modern light machine gun. The FN MAG, the M60, even the PKM, each carries a whisper of the MG-42's rhythm. That sound, that dreadful, unforgettable buzzsaw hum, still haunts the modern battlefield. For soldiers who heard it, the MG-42 was more than a weapon. It was a force of nature, a sound that froze blood and shattered confidence. Even now, veterans remember it not with admiration, but with awe, because they knew when the Hitler's buzzsaw sang, there was no mercy. Yet, in its mechanical perfection lies a paradox. The MG-42 was a masterpiece of engineering born from madness. It was beauty in the service of destruction, precision used for chaos. And that is perhaps the greatest lesson of all, that human brilliance, when untethered from morality, can create something so efficient, so elegant, and so horrifying. The MG-42 remains the echo of a warning, a reminder that progress without conscience can forge the sharpest blades. It is the legacy of steel and echoes, a ghost that hums through history, whispering through the barrels of every weapon that came after it. And as long as humanity builds machines of war, the buzzsaw will never truly be silent.